Good morning, everybody. This is a Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee work session on development impact taxes for public school improvements, exemptions to transportation and school impact taxes, and amendments to the recordation tax. This is a continuation of our work that is related to the SSB. So I do welcome everyone who is here. Again, we have, I think, the same team that we had last, was it Friday or something like that? But we have, who knows? We have representatives from the planning board. We have representatives, of course, from the Office of the County Executive, as well as Montgomery County Public Schools, particularly from the Executive Office of Management and Budget. So welcome, everybody. And before we get started, let me just address one of the particular items in today's meeting. So in terms of the recordation tax, I wanted to just point out that, you know, last time we took up issues related to the recordation tax, I believe it was 2016, and we had a pretty robust deliberation process regarding this. And of course, the impetus was to address issues of school overcrowding, particularly class size reductions and things of that nature. So there was a clear understanding as to how much, you know, we were going to need. As I read the packet, obviously our staff has done extraordinary work throughout this whole process, but it's clear that there's still some unanswered questions in terms of what would be the best path forward for the council. And it occurred to me that, you know, as we're making all of these different decisions, we still don't have a full picture, almost like a reconciliation picture, to understand if indeed we need to, you know, increase recordation taxes. If we do, then for how much? You know, what are the options? What are some scenarios and things of that nature? And so what I've recommended and actually had a conversation with the council president was to wait on this item when we have a fuller understanding and picture of all the decisions that the committees have made, and then come to full council to make a much more informed and deliberative decision around this. It is clear that, you know, we're definitely facing some difficult fiscal times. We're going, you know, through a pandemic. I mean, there's just so many things happening at the same time. And I personally, with the information we have so far, as well as the particular decisions that we have made, I personally would like to see a much fuller picture to understand exactly what the puts and takes. What is it that we're going to need vis-a-vis additional revenue, or if there are options, or perhaps if we don't. So that's my that is my proposal for today, is that we take up the other two items. We wait until we have a fuller understanding of all the decisions that the committees have made, and then give council members options. I think that's what we did last time, to react to and to make a decision at the appropriate time. So with that, let me turn it over to, unless there's anybody that my colleagues want to make a comment. Let me turn it over to Ms. Dunn, I believe. Is that what we're gonna start with, Ms. Dunn, to go through the other items in the packet?
Good morning.
Good morning.
You'll see in the packet, the council received a memorandum from Councilmember Jawando, and it had to do with various items that are in the SSP draft proposal, as well as something that has an effect on the impact taxes. And the proposal is to provide a credit against the impact tax for development that provides 2- and 3-bedroom multifamily units in the infill areas only, recognizing that one, the infill area is actually quite small, and it is all mostly transit oriented. It's all the purple line stations, it's the red line stations, and part of the planning board's SSP draft always includes information on housing and growth. And part of what was in the draft was information on 2- and 3-bedroom units and how they're built in the county. And there's a dramatic decrease in the number of 2- and 3-bedroom units that we get built in the county in general. And so Councilmember Jawando's proposal is to provide this credit in a very discrete area to try to get more of these types of units. If we did get more of these units, they would be market rate, but they would also mean we would get more MPDU units of this type as well, since any developer who's providing MPDUs must provide them in the same proportion as the market rate units that they're building. So they can't provide all the MPDUs as efficiencies or one bedrooms because it's less expensive. So that's basically it. Maybe Councilmember Joanda wants to weigh in.
Yes, I do have him on the list. Councilmember Joanda.
Thank you, Ms. Navarro, and good to be with the GO committee this morning.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Dunn, for laying that out. I think as usual, memo was great, and thank you for attaching my memo, and thank you for all the work of the staff and the planning department to get the information to put this forward. I did have in my memo, I also talked about something that we took up in Fed GO, that we're going to come back to a full council about how we deal with the overcrowding and how in our schools. But this is obviously, as was laid out, a separate proposal dealing with what I think is a great way to incentivize these larger units, which are on the decline. And we all know that, and I'm one of these families, but there's many people that want to live in a transit-oriented way. Whether you're single or you have a family, that's where we're moving. And I think we want to incentivize that, realizing that the trend is dramatically the other way, and because of the economics. So I think if we can change that a little bit and incentivize some 2 and 3 bedrooms, and we'll get some new MPDUs. Again, not a wide-ranging proposal, but something I think that would be a nice addition to a goal that we all have. I'm curious to hear what planning thinks, but I just wanted to come and present on it and hope to get the support or answer any questions from my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have Councilmember Friedson next on the list.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Navarro. First of all, for the first point about the recordation tax, I appreciate the thoughtfulness of wanting to slow down and really think through that. It's not directly required that it be taken up through this process. I'm uncomfortable with a recordation tax increase. We just did do a recordation tax increase, but certainly if we are going to look at it, we ought to look at it in a thoughtful and deliberative way. So I just wanted to note that, and thank you for that. As to this proposal, I appreciate Councilmember Joanda's putting this forward. I understand where it's coming from. We all have looked at this issue in Fed, certainly where Councilmember Joanda and I serve. We talk about this issue a lot of the family units, and we have seen some successes like the Lindley in Chevy Chase Lake, which has done this to a really impressive effect. But overall, it's a challenge, something that we need to continue to work towards, because clearly it's a problem. I'm not sure this is the right mechanism for it. I'm concerned that we would, in this proposal, be providing a significant discount to the very units that are intended to generate the most students by definition. That's the whole point. That's the whole purpose. I do think that it's a bit counter to the exact vote that this committee took on Friday, which is to reflect the cost of a student with the impact, which is the purpose of the SSP. I do think we're going to have some challenges to figure out how the financing of this entire policy with all of the puts and takes work at the end. I think that we have some significant work to figure out in that regard. And I think that this would make it a bit more challenging in order to do it. I do think that there are ways and there is a need to address the family units, but a significant discount for the mechanism that is intended to pay for the impact of student generation to the very units that are intended to generate the most students seems like the wrong place and the wrong mechanism to address the issue. So I will not be supporting it.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Council President Katz, and then I would like to hear from the Planning Board and then Ms. Dunn right after that to address this issue of, is this what do they think about the proposal in general? Council President.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning. Yes, I agree with you on the whole discussion about the recordation discussion. I too have great concerns about any increase, but I always believe many times we do this in the reverse. We should look at how much money we really need and then figure out how we're going to get there, rather than figure out the way that we do it. So I think we do need to have the discussion at full council. And as far as Councilmember Jawando's idea, I actually am in favor of the concept. My questions are, first off, I believe, are any of these numbers not arbitrary? How did you get to these numbers?
Are you asking me to directly?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, okay.
With the chair's indulgence, but I think you might be the only person to know how you got to these numbers.
Sure. I mean, well, there was a proposal to give a discount, a similarly situated discount to development in these targeted growth areas, which is not happening. And so I worked with Pam and internally to kind of mirror, but to give what we thought was a reasonable. The short answer is we thought these were reasonable. It's not a specific scientific thing. But I did want to say, I think to Mr. Friedson's point, that you will pick up the student generation in the yearly count that the school system's doing, so they will be accounted for. This would change the types of units that would be built on the front end. So I think there's a distinction there that's important. But yeah, I mean, Pam might comment. I mean, I know she will comment, but yeah, these were not magic numbers. These were just what we thought were reasonable numbers.
Okay, which I appreciate. I always like to know if we're going to do something, we should have a reason that the numbers will actually work to do it. And that's my question. And when Pam, whoever, will speak on that piece, but do we know that at the 40% or the 60% actually gets us where we need to go? Or could it be less? Should it be more? I just believe we should have some basis for the numbers. It always bothers me about just having arbitrary numbers. And as far as the reason that in the infill school impact areas are lower generators, is that because right now we don't have 2- and 3-bedroom apartments? So if we generate more, then would they really be less generating areas? And is that, as much as we want to entice a developer to put them in, I think we need to know what we're doing to ourselves once we do it. And more importantly, I'd like to know how much it costs in addition for a developer, rather than have all 1-bedroom apartments or efficiency apartments. How much does it really cost a developer to put in 2-bedroom apartments, to put in 3-bedroom apartments? And so that we would actually have some basis for what we're figuring on that. And the last thing I have is about the infill school impact areas themselves. If we're doing this and a developer comes in and says, I'm going to build, I'm going to build additional 3-bedroom apartments, is that held in the pipeline? Is someone else not able to build because that developer has gotten approval? And what is approval? When is approval? At some point, if we're going to do this, we have to make certain that we're doing it so that everybody gains from this. We get more housing. We get the developer that's actually going to do it and be able to afford to do it. And how we're going to get, how long can they hold up another project? Because this one, because they got approval doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do it. Anyhow, I have a series of questions. But in concept, I think we do have to, in some way, incentivize a developer to want to do this. Thanks.
Okay, so let me turn it over to the planning board first to get the reactions, and then Ms. Pam Dunn and Ms. Wellington wants to speak after Ms. Dunn as well. So let's go in that order.
We support this. We think it's arguably, to be completely honest with you, I'm not sure how this is consistent with the discussion from last week, but we supported the idea of reducing the impact taxes in the desired growth areas, and we see this as consistent with that. Keeping aside the question of bigger units for families, we think it's a good idea to provide some more assistance to help get more multifamily built in the smart growth areas.
All right, Ms. Dunn, I think that question about how does this comport with the decision that we made last Friday, it's a valid one. This conversation about, it's about the impact, we need to pay for the full impact, et cetera. I think it's also valid. So if you could talk a little bit about your recommendation.
Of course. All the comments here so far are accurate, although I will just point out, I do have, and I can share it if people are interested. I'll leave that up to the chair, obviously. I have a
Sure,
map
go ahead.
of different areas, which is one thing I do think is important. And actually today we may have to show other things, so I do have for the for OMB on my screen, but so this is a map. I don't know if you guys can see it all right now of the different areas, and you can see that the blue areas, the infill areas, are very concentrated. They are the purple and red line stations. They really are the transit-oriented places in the county. They get a little wider as you go up north. But the reason why it's not quite the same is saying in this geography, these green areas that were these desired growth areas, let's provide a discount for all housing in these areas, right? Because we want more housing. The difference in this case is Councilmember Jawando's recommendation is very targeted. It says, look, I recognize that when I read through and see that only 2% of the units that we're getting in the county are 3-bedroom units. That since 1950, that decline has been precipitous, and that we're getting 35% as 2-bedroom. We know that, and we have information that says multifamily is how we are headed for getting housing goals met in this county for our future residents. So if our future residents are going to be mainly the people that are going to occupy, or they'll buy some of the single family homes that turn over. I mean, it's not that clear cut. But the point is, if most of the future construction is multifamily, and yet it's not providing housing for families, we're going to have a disconnect. And so this was a very targeted. Let's look at just those units. You only get credit for the unit. You don't get credit for the whole subdivision. You don't get credit on all your market rates. You're getting credit for the unit that's 2-bedroom. You're getting credit for the unit that is 3-bedroom. So we know that we already exempt MPDUs. The council has a long history of saying affordable housing is one of our pillars of what matters in Montgomery County. So this also lines with that. It says, also if you're building 2- and 3-bedroom, you have to build 2- and 3-bedroom MPDUs. We know we get more than affordable housing for families, along with market rate housing for families. And as far as the numbers, Councilmember Katz, you're right. They weren't picked like, we know exactly what this costs, because we don't. And I don't know if Lisa Gavoni, who's the housing expert in planning, could weigh in. Perhaps she does have a better idea on the relative costs. But in our section on impact taxes, we also provide credits and discounts to developers who are providing accessible housing that is accessible to a level 1 accessibility, and they get a certain dollar amount off for providing a certain percentage of their development as those accessible units. And of it, 30% of the units is $1,000 off. If you look at a multifamily unit impact tax in the infill area, I think it's around $3,000. So getting a 40% discount would be about a little over $1,000, about $1,200. So it's not wildly out of range of what we've providing for a different public benefit. Is it the right number? We didn't have that time to do that analysis. We thought it was a reasonable thing to provide to see if we could get more of these units.
Thank you. Ms. Wellington?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for letting me speak. The county executive agrees with what planning is saying about it being a very targeted proposal for a true housing need. His concern is doing it at a market rate. He thinks that it should be for people who are at least below 100% AMI, because that's the group of people who really need housing in the county.
Thank you. Ms. Dunn, can you take this screen, share screen off so I can see everybody? Thank you. Councilmember Jawando wanted to speak up for Ms. Wellington.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wellington, you said at 100% of AMI is what you said?
That's below, yes.
Love it. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I tried to be even more reasonable in the proposal. Everyone knows how much I like making sure we have affordability at the lower levels. But I thought that because we would capture the MPDUs under this and market rate, which is both a need, right? You have people, families at both areas, right? And I just think this is a modest, targeted, and appropriate incentive in an areas where we're not getting this type of housing. And as you saw on the map, the desired growth areas are much larger. So this is, again, more targeted in scope. And I didn't thank you for adding that, Ms. Dunn, about the accessibility. I forgot about that. I forgot that we had looked at that. And so I would be comfortable leaving it where it is. I appreciate the county executive's point of view that targeting it even more affordable, but I just think it's the right mix to keep it where it is. So I thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Okay. I'm going to turn over to Councilman Murphyton in a minute, but I just wanted to speak a little bit. I guess this is a very interesting process because it is not, completely clear cut as we, I think, are making these micro decisions to further a number of goals. In my mind, I see this SSB as a very, as a robust way of positioning the county for the type of economic development and really furthers the goals in the economic development platform that we adopted last year, because it does address issues of transportation, of housing. Obviously, as we work towards that, then workforce development and business expansion, et cetera. So I see it from an economic development perspective. I see it from a housing perspective in terms of how we can create more units to also address the people or how people are struggling. And so this particular proposal is interesting because I'm totally in support of the 2 and 3 bedroom approach. And, we've had this discussion for a very long time. But at the same time, I feel like, when we engage in these conversations and staff is saying the cost is the cost and you have to be consistent, then it becomes a tough decision because, are we just going to be consistent or are we going to say, let's see how it goes? I mean, there is no guarantee that developers are even going to say, yeah, this works for me and I'm still going to do, I'm going to go ahead and do some 2 and 3 bedrooms. We don't know. But could it incentivize it? Yes, it can. Now, how will we address the impact on schools? I mean, that still remains kind of the question because we're giving this discount. And so for me and some, I'll be honest, I'm torn because of those two competing policy goals. But I am leaning towards supporting it just because I know that we just have had this glaring gap for such a long time. And if this helps a little bit, then, okay, that's great. Again, I'm not sure that we're going to see a lot of them, but it would remain to be seen. So just wanted to say that. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the discussion, but I just think it's important to kind of recognize what this is and what it isn't. In the premise behind the proposal is that the cost of the impact tax for the individual unit, the 2 and 3 bedroom unit, at 40% for the 2 bedroom and 60% of the total impact taxes for the 3 bedroom, is the difference in dollars of the cost to a developer to build a 2 bedroom and a 3 bedroom versus a 1 bedroom and an efficiency. And that is the premise. If that isn't true, if that doesn't work, then it will produce 0 new units. And so, again, I appreciate the proposal because it is an important issue. And Councilmember Jawando and I have been at Fed committee meetings for 2 years straight where this comes up repeatedly. Chair Navarro has been at COG conversations discussing housing where this comes up repeatedly. It's not for lack of interest here, but I'm just not sure that this is the lever and the mechanism to do it. And I'm not sure that the outcome will end up getting us significantly closer, even marginally closer to where we're trying to go. And I am concerned that it is completely inconsistent with what we did on Friday. I mean, we made a very significant decision that was a departure from the planning board's recommendation for a very specific reason. And, I think it's being framed a little bit as an either or. This is what the planning board proposed. In lieu of that, we are going to propose this. And I don't see it that way. I think we voted for that for a very specific reason, and there are implications to that. And now we're taking this up separately and deciding whether or not it fits into a coherent and consistent policy that ultimately has to be reconciled financially at the end. We have to make sure that we can fund adequate public facilities, which is the whole purpose of this exercise. Everything else is an added bonus that we would like to do to have adequate and appropriate public facilities. But that is the key. That is what this whole exercise is about. Do we have enough funding for the student generation for schools? Do we have enough funding for transportation for our transportation network? Is it adequate, and is it appropriate for the type of community that we want to build? So I just will note that I think it's really important that we focus on what this is and what it isn't, and that we, frankly, have a better understanding of what the costs are. I find it, hard to have a real good handle on whether or not this would generate any 2 and 3 bedroom units, because it's premised on numbers that we're not aware of in terms of the economics of the discount being worth more than the cost burden and changing overall the economics.
Council President Katz, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. There again, I think, first off, if we don't do the incentive here, where would we do the incentive? And I don't know that answer, but I do believe there should be that answer. And secondly, I would still like to know whether or not whether the 40% and the 60% actually matter to the developer that would have to do this. My guess is that they would have a developer that's building a multifamily building have to figure out their entire income from that multifamily building and to get their rate of return. And I don't know that to Councilmember Friedson's point, I don't know that these numbers actually get, even though he's not in agreement with this, I don't know that these numbers actually get us there. And if they don't, what numbers would? And I think we need to have that information before we have the discussion about what we're doing, or before we have a motion on what we're doing. Thanks.
All right, I have Councilmember Jawando next.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and Madam Chair. I actually was going to ask that question of Ms. Scavone if she has a sense of the cost difference and if that would make an impact. But I think we also want to be careful here. 2 things that were made. The SSP is about a lot of things, and I think this is an appropriate place to do this, to make incentives. And based on other things we're doing in the SSP, I think this is an appropriate place. And then every 2 years, we'll have this student generation study, and the rates will adjust. So we will capture whatever additional students, and they will be paid for in that process. The other thing is that you can't, I think it's kind of, you can't say that it's not going to work, and then there's a cost worry. If it doesn't work, then there's no cost because they're not built. I think, but if we do build them, then they will be able to take advantage of the discount. So I think Ms. Scavone can hopefully shed some light. I don't want to put all the pressure on you, but on the point, well, will this make a difference for developers?
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Jawando, Lisa Scavone, for the record. So while I don't have construction data off the top of my head right now, this is something we can certainly look at and get back to you either at a subsequent session or the full council. We do have rent data that shows that the rent per square foot for efficiencies in studios is much higher than 2 and 3 bedroom family size units. So that's one reason that we're not seeing a lot of them, but this is something that planning will have to take a look at to really get the full picture, but it's something that we can provide at a future date.
Okay. Thank you. And I have to jump away. It sounds like, I don't know what Madam Chair, it sounds like we may or may not have something here, but we'll see. But I defer to your leadership.
Yeah, I think that, well, reading the tea leaves, I think there are at least 2 members of that committee that would be interested in more information in order to make a decision. I'm not predisposing with Councilmember Friedson. He may want more information too, but so I think that we will probably, what we'll do is try to get that additional information, and then we'll work with the council president to see whether it's something that would come back to GO, or maybe it comes back to full council where we're taking the full robust conversation. But, you know, I do think that I personally believe that it's a very important policy goal. Just would like to have those questions answered, especially what Council President Katz had put forth. So we'll
always happy to get more information, and I also agree with the overarching policy goal. I think the question is just whether or not this is the right mechanism. So the information would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you.
Okay, so next issue.
Could I jump in for a second? Excuse me. This is Glenn. I just wanted to respond a little bit to a question that came up right at the beginning, which was what is the need for the increase of the recordation tax, or need generally for revenue? This is only part answer. It's something just fished out in the last 10 minutes during your deliberation on the last discussion. In terms of the school increment or any school funding, the Board of Education for the FY 21 to 26 CIP requested a CIP of $1,818 million. What the council ultimately approved for it was 95% of it, which was $1,728,000. So essentially, if you were to use the board's request as the need, the total need, at least in this next 6-year period, then the amount that the council did not provide over that 6-year period was $90 million, or about $15 million a year. So now the Board of Education and none of the agencies that apply for, ask for money in the CIP get everything they want, of course. The board usually does much better than the others, but nevertheless, as you see, they didn't get 100%, they got 95%. But if you're using as a if you were to use as a marker the board's request for money compared to what they got, then the delta is about $15 million a year.
I appreciate that. Yeah,
that's all
no,
I
I appreciate that, and that is why I thought that it would be important for us to take a little bit more time so that the entire council can decide based on the particular scenario. So you just gave us a target. Right. Perhaps we can have a number of proposals or scenarios that the council could then react to. I keep reflecting, and it's not anybody's fault, because obviously we're doing this through a pandemic and we're doing it virtually, and it's just like a lot going on. But I reflect on when we did this last time, and the fact that we had quite a bit of time and interaction, and and an opportunity to really dissect and figure out what we may want to do. And it just feels a little bit, for me, it just feels kind of rushed. And I can only imagine for council members who were not here back then, also how they may want to have more information or some scenarios or different targets to say, hey, if you decide this would be the gap, or if you go this way, this would be the delta, this is the implications, etc. So that's why. But I do appreciate that as one of the targets for us to also to be thinking about. Okay, so let's see. So let's go back to the next. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody said they wanted. Oh, is this Mary Beck? Sorry, Mary Beck. I need to put you in my contact list. I see your face. Your name. Go ahead, Mary Beth.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on a couple things that Glenn said. I think in addition to the need, in terms of thinking about what the school board has been asking for, we also need to keep in mind that with the Build to Learn Act, there are some fairly onerous match requirements, and none of us want to leave money on the table with the state, but we will need local funding to leverage the full amount that could be allocated to the county. And I think one of my concerns with some of the reductions in the impact taxes that have been proposed is that there might be hesitation to raise the recordation tax for many of the reasons that were just mentioned. And we would already be struggling. So to do anything that would put us in a more difficult position would just make matters worse potentially. So thank you.
Yeah, I understand that. Thank you so much. All right, Ms. Dunn, next item.
Yes, so if you're following along, we are moving to the top of the third page of the staff report. And this is about the impact tax exemption for projects providing a minimum of 25% of their units as affordable. This is something that was changed in 2018, and it's been actually quite a popular exemption. There's quite a few projects that have taken advantage of it, and a number of units that are proposed to take advantage of it. So in the planning board draft, they have recommendation 6.7, which proposes two changes to this current exemption. The first one is that it would require all the affordable units to be placed in the county or a municipality's moderately priced dwelling unit program. And that's fairly straightforward and actually, I think, a beneficial change. It means that the units that are being exempt and that are actually allowing them the exemption of a lot of market rate affordable units will be under an affordability control for 99 years. So that first part, as I said, is pretty straightforward. Staff supports that change.
Any comments from my colleagues? It seems like a pretty straightforward
In agreement.
change. Again, without objection. Yeah, we agree with that.
Okay. And the second part, though, has to do with placing a limit on the exemption. Currently, the exemption relieves a project from its obligation to pay both school and transportation impact tax on all of its units in exchange for providing a minimum of 25% of them as affordable. And as I mentioned, there are 14 projects that are either approved or in the process of approval, including over 6,000 units. 800 of these would be required MPDUs, given our either 12.5 or 15% requirement in the county, but almost an equal amount then, another 800 or so, would be what we would call incentivized MPDUs as a result of this. But OMB has done some analysis on this, some preliminary analysis, and come up with a number for the foregone impact tax for these market rate units that amounts to over $100 million. Recognizing the potential impact on this current exemption on school and transportation infrastructure revenue, and aiming to balance this concern with affordable housing, the planning board's exemption proposal would place a limit rather than a total exemption on those market rate units. And that limit would be that they would provide a discount equal to the lowest impact tax rate in the county for that unit type. And that is a very complicated way of talking about it. When I first looked at it, it was hard to understand at first, right? They provided two charts in their draft and really had to look at them to realize what that meant. But then as I delved into it more, it made a lot of sense, because if you had just said, well, why wouldn't they do something more simply like 50% discount, 75%? Our highest impact taxes are in places where the rent differential between an MPDU rent and a market rate rent are very close. And so by a percentage, you'd be more incentivized to take that discount in those locations, and we wouldn't be then maybe getting the units where we need them. So staff supports their recommendation, although at the time of this report, I didn't have back some information from OMB on the potential impact. I have it if you want me to share my screen.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so what this is just, okay, OMB is amazing and does fast and a lot of work. This is a part of one of the spreadsheets that I was provided because I thought it was something we could really focus in on. And what it shows is in the gray column, so pre-2018, before this exemption came into place, we had the 12.5 or 15% MPD requirement. And it gives you the estimate of the impact taxes that would be collected. It's using those 14 projects that are currently in the process or have been approved as like the basis for doing the analysis. So what would happen with those had they come in pre-2018? Now they're in currently with this exemption. So the impact taxes for them would be zero, right? They get to take advantage because they are all providing, these 14 are providing more than 25% MPDUs. And then the next three columns are really about, well, what would it look like under the new exemption changes and the planning board draft? So the third column here is, if you looked at, and OMB can speak to this more than I can actually, I'll go through it briefly, ask questions of them. The next one is really that has the planning board draft, but again, it gets to looking at all of the changes that they recommend. So it's the one rate for multifamily, and it's discounting the desired growth areas, and it provides the discount, as I just mentioned, that it would remove the lowest rate of other units in the county for that type. The next is based on recommendations that have already been made by the committees to combine the low and high rise, to separate out low and high rise again, rather than to combine them, and to not be discounting the designated growth areas. And calculating, I just want to make a point, and calculating the multifamily from 1990 on, that change, calculating multifamily from 1990 to current, rather than using all the years, it reduced impact taxes and the 120% to 100%. Okay, that's the other change going on. So there's a lot of moving pieces to Madam Chair's point about really getting like, what are the options here? What have we changed? And we will be pulling more of that together as more decisions are made. We'll bring it all together. And the last one is just, what if that discount, rather than the planning board's recommendation, you just said they only get 75% of that. 75% of the process that the planning board's recommended. So again, it's not just 75% across the board. The target range really for what, and this is what I was told by OMB that they use for the HIF, that they think is a reasonable amount to be incentivizing or subsidizing MPDUs per unit, is about $50,000. And really, I think we should be looking at what's the cost to the county of all the MPDUs from the project, not just the incentivized ones, because we are really now getting them at a lower rate than we would expect, because the developer is really paying the cost. We are foregoing the impact taxes on those units, but they're providing the whole unit. So to me, this line makes a lot of sense. And you can see that the planning board's recommendation, the slight changes that the Fed committee has made and the GEO committee have raised this slightly, but not terribly. And it is a lot less than, say, what is currently happening now, which is almost double what you'd want to be subsidizing MPDUs at. So I'll leave it there. If you have questions for me or for OMB.
Thank you. Council President Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Ms. Dunn touched on several of my questions. There again, to me, this gets back to the basics. How much does a developer who wants to build that building, how much do they need in order for them to do what we would like them to do? That's go to at least 25% for MPDUs. And so that number to me is very important. And then the other part of this, and Ms. Dunn did not touch on this one yet, there's some question about that we would discuss at a later time, grandfathering of the 14 projects that have come in right now. And I'm a strong believer that if somebody plays by the rules and they've done what we have asked them to do, for us to change the rules while they're doing what we have asked them to do is just plain and simply wrong. So I don't believe we should have it at a later time. I believe if we change any of this, we should say to the 14 projects that are in there right now, or whatever the right number is, that we would grandfather each and every one of them so that they can continue on because they've done what we've asked them to do. So 2 parts. Number one is the incentive. I have no problem with an incentive. I do have a concern that, there again, that the numbers are actually right. And if we got rid of the incentive, is it cheaper is it easier for that developer to say, you know what, I'm going to go back. I was going to do 25%. My numbers don't work. I'll go back to the 12.5 or 15%, whichever is their minimum, and then not do the extra percentage. We've gained nothing if we do that for affordable housing. So that's where I am. But I do think, I don't want to look at loss. I do believe we should have the discussion right now that any group that is has already come in and is playing by the rules, they get grandfathered, that they would not be a part of any change. Thanks.
Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. First of all, I totally agree with Council President on the last point that
We have that recorded, please. Isn't that what you wanted me to do the other day? Go ahead.
And I know we're taking that up at a later date, but I just wanted to, express my agreement. I don't think there's any real disagreement that, there needs to be a mechanism in place that honors the expectation and commitment that's been set by the county. If folks are doing things the way that we tell them to do them, we should honor our end of the deal. And I think that's true in this. I think that should be true always. And so look forward to that subsequent discussion, but start from that point. I'm really interested in this chart. It's not totally consistent with other charts that I have seen on MPDUs and how we came up with the cost. We did take up this issue when Councilmember Reamer put forward a potential change to the MPDU or affordable housing 25% requirement about 18 months ago or a year ago or so. In Fed, he subsequently, we kind of, I don't think formally, but somewhat informally put off that conversation and that discussion. This seems to be the current iteration of that conversation and discussion. But what that chart showed was very striking and clear that not all MPDUs are created equally, that construction costs are similar, but rents necessarily are not. And the benefit and the delta between market rent and the MPDU income restrictions are different in different parts of the county. And so the quote unquote value to the county or the cost, difference is different depending on where it is. Now, I think appropriately, we've made a decision not to have different, benefits in Bethesda as we do in Germantown, for instance, which has different rents naturally, or in Olney, et cetera. But that was, very clear, that the quote unquote deal to the county was different depending on where it was. This has a different approach where it looks at it countywide and just makes a specific determination. But I'm just a little bit interested to understand how the cost per MPDU was determined for the basis of this chart specifically. And then similarly, I just wanted to point out, when we say the developer bears the cost for the MPDU, that's only partially true. The reality is the other renters, the other units bear the cost for the MPDU. That's what inclusionary zoning means. We're including people who have income restrictions in order to create, a broader, more diverse income breakdown within different developments. I think that is an extremely important, laudable goal. It's at the basis of our land use policy in Montgomery County. But it's not just about the developers deciding whether or not they want to or don't want to pay for it. It's whether or not the rest of the units can absorb the cost of subsidizing the rent, because that's how it works in reality. And so I don't think we should lose sight of that, because it does naturally raise the rents for the other units. And the benefit is that it spreads out the rents over a large number of units. And hopefully that marginal change is not enough to impact who can access those units, but the restriction for the MPDU is a difference for who can access those units, which creates the type of community and the type of development that we want. But Pam, could you explain how exactly did we come up with the cost differentials to make the basis of this chart?
I would actually prefer if the OMB analyst who created the chart wants to weigh in on that. But what I will say, the one distinction, and not the easiest proposal to explain, but this one, because what is being proposed is that you get a discount, but it is really pivoting off of the lowest impact tax rate for that structure type. It leaves that relative difference in impact taxes relative to structure and student generation in the county. And I know I'm not explaining that well, but I think it does mean that we're not treating the same unit in infill as the same unit in Greenfield. They are relatively being treated based on where they are currently. And I'm sorry, I'm doing a poor job explaining how that works. But perhaps Ms. Salam wants to weigh in on the chart.
Yes, Ms. Beck.
I think
Hi.
Po-Fen has the technical expertise. Thanks, Po-Fen.
No, I think, Pam, would it be possible that we show them more detailed spreadsheet? I think maybe easier for people to look at it instead of look at the summary table. So,
Sure, give me 1 second.
okay. I think when Pam tried to bring up the spreadsheet, just give everybody a sort of quick idea in terms of how we look at the 14 projects. So Pam, if you go to just pick any of the detailed spreadsheet, proposed spec revised, that worksheet, the yellow one, you click on that worksheet. Thank you. So the way that we look at that, the 14 project, we determine, calculate what is the 25% market rate units, and then we apply whatever the rate based on what Pam described. So Pam, if you can move the screen down a little bit, they can show everybody in terms of what is the rate. I think at the row number 42, 43. So this is how we determine when you reach the 25% threshold, what is the market rate would have to pay on the different kind of housing type. So through the exercise, Pam, if you don't mind, move all the way to the top and then the far right corner, the far right column, the last one, which is give everybody a sense of, column BG. So the way we calculate it is just try to understand the exemption for school and the transportation impact when the market rate, what is their responsibility, and it depends on the school impact area. So if you look at the cost incentivized MPGU center, you can see the cost is vary, depends on which school impact area the project is located. So in Greenfield, the number 4 project is almost $200,000 per cost, whereas in Bethesda, could be much lower. It's about 50 something thousand dollars per cost. So it does vary.
Well, Fen, I would also just notice to the committee that cost varies by region, but it really also, the huge impact is the structure type as well, right?
Yeah.
When the structure type is a townhouse versus the structure type is a high-rise multifamily unit, it's very different.
Right. Depends on the number of the, whether, how many units are high-rise, low-rise, or all that kind of combination. It would change how we calculate or the outcome of the per incentivized MPDU.
Pam, could you move to the right one bit? I don't know about others, but my screen, it's blocked because I'm looking at people instead of the column. Yeah,
there?
That's better. That column BG was what Po-Fen was just referring to. I don't know if people could see it before. I know I could not. And I will say, I tend to focus on this cost per incentivized MPDU. And the reason I do that is because this is the extra amount we got by offering the incentive was another either 12.5 or 15% MPDUs. And what it cost us was the cost of those units, which we were always willing to pay, right? Because MPDUs have always had no impact taxes. But the cost is based on the number of market rate units. And as Pam said, it matters how many market rate units, it matters what kind of market rate units, and it matters where they are because they have different student generation rates. So those factors make a difference. In fact, just this morning I asked Po-Fen, could you look at what would happen if the exemption was only in place in the red zones, because that is an area where we want more development, we want more MPDUs, and frankly, they're more expensive if we have to buy affordable housing in those areas. And again, the reason I care about that cost per incentivized unit is a lot of this money is fungible. While if we get more school impact taxes, it does not directly help affordable housing, but it allows us to use recordation taxes or recordation tax premiums differently in a way that can perhaps free up some money for housing. And so we could buy more units if they were tending to cost on average $50,000 a unit than if we're giving away impact taxes and it's costing us $105,000 a unit. So that's part of the concern. This is a very complicated policy. But we've had a lot of money that's been sort of given away to get these extra MPDUs, and I think we've overpaid, frankly.
Okay, Councilmember Friedson, any?
Yeah, no,
questions?
thanks. I have some questions about the analysis, but I'm not, I support the policy change, so I'll take some time to dive into some of the details. I do think there has been a little bit of a history of overcooking the predictions of what the MPDU impacts, have been based on this exemption. I know the county executive has never been particularly supportive of it, but I think the overall point that Ms. Beck makes is important, that the exemptions are different depending on where they are in the county, not just because of the rent, but also because of the impact taxes. There's different costs and we're going different revenue. There's also different benefits, as we talked about before. We want certain types of units in certain types of places with broader policy. So I will reserve my further questions for a later date when I can dive into this even further. I appreciate it, Ms. Beck. Appreciate it.
Let me turn to Ms. Wellington, who had been in the list for a little while. Ms. Wellington, you still want to make a comment?
Yes, I do. Here I am. Thank you. Yes, as the county executive said in the answers that he sent to the council in September, he believes that the planning board's recommendation is a really great start to getting a handle on the extra costs, the unexpected. I mean, compared to when the policy was put into effect, the unexpected consequence of the expense of the incentivized MPDUs. I mean, with the lowest one, according to that chart, being $105,000. It does make one feel that the county could spend that money more wisely. So he supports the change proposed by the planning board and would love to go into this in greater detail, as Councilmember Friedson said, at another date.
Thank you, Ms. Wellington. Council President Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I actually will move that we approve the staff recommendation with grandfathering clause. And that to me is a huge concern.
Okay. So second, Councilmember Friedson.
Yes, second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded, and we have some hands that went up. Let me turn to Mr. Sartori first.
Sure. I thank you. For the record, Jason Sartori with the Planning Department. I just wanted to make sure, reiterate what is in the transition clause that the Planning Board had sent over was that any preliminary plan application filed and accepted prior to March 1st, 2021 would be grandfathered in, would continue under the current policy. So that is I guess the question is whether that's sufficient or if there's a need to extend that beyond or put some other classification or status classification threshold on there other than preliminary plan application filed and accepted.
All of the 14 projects that you discussed, are all of those fit under the definition that you just said?
I believe so, and I'm looking to see if Ms. Gavoni is going to nod. She's nodding, so yes, they do.
Okay.
She nodded.
Based on Mrs. Gavoni's nod and yours, okay, I'm comfortable, because that's my concern, is that something gets lost in the shuffle. We say, oh, you played by the rules, but the rules changed and you didn't play fast enough. That's not fair.
Now,
Go ahead.
but I was just going to say there may be other applicants that are not that far along in the process that are still planning to use this exemption, and that I think may be the concern that some of the communication you guys have received has been related to. So, and they don't anticipate being that far along in the process, and so I think there's still a question over whether or not this is sufficient.
I'll chime in a little bit more. We know of at least 5 additional projects that have not yet filed that intend to take advantage of it, but we have talked to several of those project developers, and they do intend to file by March of 2021. So we do, all of the projects that we know about, we do believe will be grandfathered.
Okay, I know Ms. Dunn had her hand up, and then Dr. Orland had his hand up. Let's go to Ms. Dunn.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we did receive communication from just a small handful of basically representatives for property owners who are interested in still taking advantage of this, but yes, who have not filed their preliminary plan application. And I think there is some concern if they will be able to file an application in time for the deadline. So we as staff will continue looking at that. We had not brought you forward the grandfathering because we needed to really look at that in detail and see what kind of language change could be made, and we'll bring you that option, and you can see. I mean, we can certainly go with what the planning board's recommended, but it might be a tweak to language, and we'll work with those people who are concerned.
That is where my concern is, and if somebody is not further along, but they've already spent a lot of money to get to where they are, and we want what they're doing, why wouldn't we work with them? So I think we have to have the proper language in whatever we're doing, but the thought is, yes, this is fair, and we should grandfather those who are in the process or are continuing the process. Thanks.
Dr. Orland?
Pass.
Okay.
Ms. Cavoni answered the question that I was going to. Thank you.
Councilmember Friedson, I think you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think Ms. Dunn's, recommendation here to look at it would work for me and satisfy what I think both Councilmember Katz and I are looking to do. And I think the philosophy behind this is, we've articulated is, we don't want to be, changing the rules in the middle of the game, and it's a long planning process for a lot of folks. And I think this is an appropriate change, but we should make sure we're doing it without, unfairly or unreasonably impacting those who are already well along in the process.
Well, I guess we can agree that it is what Councilmember Katz, Councilmember Friedson, and Councilmember Navarro wants to do. So we'll do that. So we'll accept the recommendation with the caveat, of course, that staff will go back and take a look and see if there's refined language, if that's needed, that reflects the intention of the committee members. Okay. And what's next? Anything else? Since we are going to come back in terms of the recreation tax, possibility is that we might take that to full council. Actually, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I just think similarly to the recordation tax, I also just wanted to note there are certain impacts of the various decisions that we've made on impact taxes in the different areas. I am committed to making sure that we are not, based on the changes to discounts and other things that we have done, having an impact where there are higher impact taxes being paid, based on the elimination of, an impact unintentionally. And so I just think that, as we come back to the recordation tax as part of that discussion, we also, I hope, will have an opportunity either as a committee or at full council to look at the full puts and takes and the broader fiscal impacts of all the decisions that we've made, what all the building types are, what the ultimate funding look like for the school system in particular, as well as our transportation infrastructure, and then move forward to make sure that the broader policy and the details of the policy that we've taken up kind of one by one fit together and the puzzle works. So
definitely. Great. Ms. Dunn, do you have something to, I saw you.
We can bring it to council, but I just wanted to let you know I do have on the PowerPoint that I have a chart that shows you kind of where you are with impact taxes and how that comports to the current rate. So you could see that none of them have increased. They've actually gone down. And I have a second chart that says, okay, if these are the changes we've made to date, kind of what does that look like? And so far there's a net increase in revenue related to that. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so that's it for today. So really appreciate everybody's input and great expertise here, and we will make sure that we follow up on those other items in scheduling with the president. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.